issues that we're dealing with.
Anywhere, yeah. This is David Perry, and welcome back to 10%. I'm speaking with Neil Grungras, the founding executive director of ORAM. Welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us, what is ORAM and how does it serve the LGBT community?
ORAM is the Organization for Refuge, Asylum and Migration, and it's the only organization in the world that actually focuses on LGBT refugees.
Well, and this is something that a lot of people, certainly here in Northern California, where we seem to take so much for granted, realize is a real issue. I know that my husband has a friend who fled Peru. Because he feared for his life many years ago and didn't know what to do when he came to California. Is this the sort of person that would come to you?
That is one of the sorts of people that will come to us, but actually your husband is very lucky in that he got to California, because most LGBT refugees actually don't get to enter a country where they're safe. They usually manage to escape. Well, sometimes they don't, but when they manage to escape, it's very often to a country where they're unsafe. And then they're unable to get into a place where they can continue to live.
Right, right. I mean, my husband's friend, when he left Peru, you know, would tell these horror stories about the homophobia in that country. I mean, we don't, I think, in the United States, think of Peru or South American countries as homophobic. What are some of the best or worst countries as far as abuse?
There are some countries that are heading the list right now. I would think Saudi Arabia, Iran, Jamaica, Egypt. In Saudi Arabia, just this year, 2 gay men were beheaded. We think that they were beheaded because they were gay, but you can't know for sure. In Iran, in the last 20 years, 4,000 gays have been executed.
4,000?
4,000.
And what is the official impetus behind that? What were their crimes?
The crimes vary. They're all over the place. In some countries, the crime is actually sodomy. Sodomy is actually the crime of homosexuality, or sodomy, is actually illegal in 86 countries around the world. And
until a year and a half ago in 26 states in the United States.
The difference is that in the United States you don't get a death penalty. And of course we're not sanctioning the situation in the United States, but in many countries around the world, gays are terrified every day. And it's not just the act of being out and then being caught, but in a lot of countries there's actual entrapment going on. For example, in Iran, if you're having an internet conversation with someone, because of course you're terrified to go out to the bars, if there were bars, you may be speaking to a secret agent who's arranging a meeting with you so that you can be arrested and then put to death.
How do you get the information that informs what you do at ORAM? For instance, where do you get the information about the situation you just mentioned in Iran or some other countries, about people being entrapped or going on the internet and having someone track them?
You find out from individuals who've managed to come out and tell the story. In Iran, for example, we don't deal inside Iran because we deal only with refugees. That means that the people have already managed to escape, to come out. People who come out of Iran usually will have been entrapped in one way or another. They'll tell us the story, and then what we do is we help them apply for refugee status. We help them, first of all, be recognized as refugees, and then to try to find a country that will accept them.
So it's not necessarily the United States that you're encouraging people to become refugees to?
Not at all the United States. What we do is we help people who haven't been fortunate enough to get into a safe country. Most of the people who look at refugees in the United States say, wow, we're getting so many people here. What they don't realize is that there are tens of millions of refugees who haven't managed to get anywhere that's safe. So, for example, a refugee from Iran might be able to get into Turkey, but they can't stay in Turkey. They have to hustle to find another country. And that can take years sometimes, and then they can get beaten up on the streets of Turkey while they're looking to get into
I would imagine if I were a lesbian or a gay man or a transgender individual from a Mideast country like Iran that was not quote-unquote gay-friendly and wanted to apply for refugee status and get to Turkey, which is maybe a little better, I probably wouldn't say, well, I'm a refugee because I'm homosexual. So what do you do?
Well, that's one of the, what you just pointed out was one of the reasons that we formed ORAM. What happened is we found out that people were coming to these countries and applying for refugee status, but they were so terrified to come out that they were making up reasons and then they were being denied refugee status because they had lied. Oftentimes, after the denial, they would appeal and then finally tell the truth, and then they'd be denied again because the adjudicator would say, well, you lied the first time, how do I know you're telling the truth this time? Most LGBTs who live in very repressive societies have no idea that it's okay to tell somebody, an official, that you're gay or lesbian or trans, and even less so that you can actually get refugee status based on that.
Mm-hmm. How is this different in Europe? I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the European Court of Justice has some very, by our standards, progressive statutes governing refugee status for lesbian and gay individuals, correct?
It's true. Well, the United States standard is good too, but you have to have gotten into the U.S. or you have to have gotten into Europe. And most Western countries are very occupied right now in trying to keep refugees out of all kinds. So the problem is not once somebody has gotten in here. When somebody's gotten in, for instance, into Germany or into France or into the U.S., there are lots of very good-spirited government officials and even, and attorneys and an LGBT community that's willing to help. The problem is that if you're one of the majority, and I would say one of the 95%, you can't get into one of the countries where you can get relief.
Tell us how your personal story brought you from the United States, San Francisco. I know you've traveled extensively. I know you were in Israel working for several years. And now back to this. How did this circle come complete?
I loved living in San Francisco. I traveled very extensively. As you said, I practiced refugee law here in the United States for many years, for about 20 years. And then I was assigned to Israel by a refugee organization. While working there, I started to see some very unusual cases. And these were Palestinians who had come into Israel from the occupied territories, telling me things that I could hardly believe and things that I had never heard before.
Stories specifically about persecution because of their sexuality?
Absolutely. Stories about being tortured many times, stories that I can't tell on camera, things that are absolutely harrowing and for no reason at all. People having been immersed in sewage water for days and so on. And it seemed to me that there was a pattern of looking for LGBTs, particularly gay men, and scapegoating them. And I started to wonder why it was that nobody else was dealing with this issue. Why was nobody discussing it? Why was no one helping these people? And how could it be that there were so many refugee organizations in the world and no one was focusing on what's...
There was no quote-unquote gay desk, as it were.
There's no gay desk at all. And if you look at the numbers, you realize that gays are probably the most persecuted people in the world. And yet, none of the mainstream organizations are talking about it.
Why do you think that is? Just hoping will go away, or that it's not large enough an issue to deal with, from their point of view?
I think the issue is too large for them to deal with. I think there are just so many gays escaping persecution, and lesbians and trans, that the issue could blow up in their faces. I think that a lot of organizations are also very uncomfortable dealing with the issue. And it's very easy to say, that's the cultural standard in that country, and we don't interfere with what's going on in country A or country B. That's their business. So if they want to behead their gays, let them do it. It's their law.
Mm-hmm. How different is this situation going to be under a President Obama? And does that really matter as far as your work is concerned?
It matters a lot. Under President Obama, we'll be able to talk much more in the U.S. about persecution of LGBTs. The U.S. will become more receptive to LGBT refugees, we hope, and that's one of our goals, is to reserve more spots here for LGBT refugees so that people who are stuck in these countries where they're not only were persecuted where they came from, but are also afraid where they are now living, can have a hope of coming into the U.S.
And are there, pardon me for my ignorance on this, but are there actual quotas? Like, okay, the United States will accept this many gay, lesbian, transgender refugee cases this year, or consider this many?
There is no quota right now. There's no provision. The U.S. does have quotas for refugees. It does. The U.S. accepts about 50,000 refugees a year. That's a lot. But there is no set-aside right now for LGBTs.
Is that something that ORAM would like to have?
We would love to have that, and that's one of the things that we're working
So
toward.
legislatively, how do you do that? Who do you lobby? Who do you go to?
You talk to the congresspeople who are most interested in LGBT issues, you talk to the State Department, you talk to the people who actually divide up the numbers, and those aren't necessarily Congresspeople. Those are often career diplomats or people at the Department of State. That can be shown the situation. I don't think we need many thousands of spaces. I think we can reserve a few hundreds.
But we certainly need more.
We certainly need more.
Here's a note to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. I might expect a phone call or an email from Neil Grungras. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
This is David Perry, and thank you for joining us on 10%, your LGBT TV for Northern California. We'll see you next week.